Small and Smart, a Chinese lab has shaken a core tenet of AI development, showing more that more can be done with less. India must take note. If artificial intelligence is the new battlefield, where was this first shot fired? Was it last week when a Chinese AI lab released a large language model developed at a fraction of the cost of the ones built by Silicon Valley, yet capable of beating these same models on several benchmarks? Or was it this week when Wall Street opened to a bloodbath, with US stocks losing a reported $1 trillion in value, including chip maker Nvidia's $600 billion drop? Perhaps it can be traced way back to October 22 when the US, in an effort to retain its edge, banned the export of China of advanced AI chips used for AI development. As question piles up upon the implications of China's DeepSeek R1 and the future of AI, one thing is clear: America's lead in the race has shrunk considerably. It seems to have happened, moreover, in the blink of an eye, catching the US and Silicon Valley as indeed the world completely by surprise. Yet it is not as if DeepSeek, with a logo featuring a blue whale, surfaced out of nowhere, a minnow compared to the big four in the China's tech sector: Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and Xiaomi. DeepSeek has made ripples last year when it released the V3 model, which was developed by Andrej Karpathy, one of the founders of OpenAI, as a frontier-grade LLM trained on a joke of a budget, a mere $6 million compared to over $500 million that OpenAI had reportedly spent on ChatGPT. The January 20 debut of R1, a reasoning model developed on a shoestring budget with a second-rate chips which can nonetheless perform as well as OpenAI's most advanced model, shook one of the central tenets of AI development in US, that it take billions of dollars to produce cutting-edge technology that excess of lack of access to first-rate chips couldn't hinder. DeepSeek also shows the limits of America's small yard high fence approach, and that smaller, nimble competitors could easily get within heel snapping distance. The open source strategy adopted by Chinese lab, including DeepSeek, as opposed to proprietary model favored by those in US, also hint another way in which rules of the claims could be written by China, as more global talent and indeed other countries nursing their own AI ambitions gravitate towards free to use models. India, which talks of building sovereign AI, may find hope in the DeepSeek story, that it is possible to do more with less, yet even as it puts its weight being the ambition and talent of the homegrown tech sector, and puts in the 10,000 crore committed under India AI mission in 2024, the government must also find a way to access the best AI hardware. If the future will be defined by AI, India must be a part of it. In defamation case against Atishi, Delhi court sends out right message that political matters are for the ballot, not witness box. Colonial era laws and some of their successors in independent India are often misused to curb free speech. Weaponizations of provisions of criminal defamation under CRPC and the BNSS stand out. Too often, cases that appear politically motivated or rely on the loosely defined idea of herd sentiments make their way through the system, often, and they are seen as serving partisan ends. In such circumstances, at the entry level it is for the judiciary at the entry level to separate politics from justice and protect free speech. The Sessions Judge of Special Judge Vishal Gongne in Delhi has risen admirably to the task of adjudicating politically sensitive matter ahead of the assembly election. It must serve as an example across the country. Last April, Atishi, who became the Delhi's chief minister, accused the BJP of trying to poach its leaders and threatening them with actions to investigate agencies. The defamation case filed against her by Delhi BJP leader Praveen Shankar Kapoor alleged that in essence she made false allegations to distract from the Delhi's excise policy scam, and that AAP was trying to portray that BJP is trying to subvert the Delhi government by illegal means. Judge Ghogne quashed the summons against Atishi, underlining at least three principles that become part of the judicial and political common sense. First, he reiterated that essential part of free speech permits one's man subaltern to be another man's Naxal. One's man subaltern to be another man's Naxal. It permits one man's freebie to another man's welfare. It permits one man's freebie to another man's welfare. Second, court asserted that final judgment on common political comments and assertions must be answered by the court of the people through election and not courts of law through discussions on defamation. The court also questioned Kapoor's claim of being aggrieved by Atishi's sentiments. A person looking to represent himself as aggrieved by virtue of being a member of the party cannot claim legal status as an aggrieved purely upon his legal status as a member of the party. The judiciary, particularly at the trial court level, have been in the recent times as passing the buck on politically sensitive matters, including defamation and grant of bail. In August last year, the CJI Vice D.Y. Chandrachud asked trial court judges to exercise robust common sense by insisting that a court of law cannot aid the tilting of the democratic balance between unequal political formations against the right to freedom of speech. Delhi court has just done just that. It is now for the political class to introspect and perhaps be more judicious in playing politics in court. The publication of a spate of memoirs from Kargil war hero Lieutenant General Y.K. Joshi's Who Dares Wins, to Amol Palekar's Viewfinder, to the English translation of Finnish women's account of life in the Soviet Union under Stalin in 1930s under the sickle and sledgehammer, paints a reassuring picture of the enduring appeal and historical debt. One machine can do the work of 50 ordinary men. Machine can do the work of one extraordinary man. Albert Hubbard. India and China finally talking to each other again rather than past each other. Are we then headed back to their pre-Galvan normal relationship, or is the present thaw likely to turn cold and conflictual again? Nothing in India-China relations is ever simple and linear, but the signs are that the two countries are moving towards normal diplomacy. Of the past 35 years, ever since Rajiv Gandhi's breakthrough trip to Beijing in 1988. From 98 onwards, India-China relations came to rest on four pillars that undergirded a fair degree of military and diplomatic stability: symmetry, border negotiations, confidence-building measures, and people-to-people ties, including trade. Until Galwan, the top leaders of the leadership of India and China would meet regularly, bilaterally, and multilaterally, often more than once a year. Running parallel to symmetry were the border negotiations in one form or another. Talks on the final territorial settlement have run for over 30 years with few interruptions, a remarkable fact. Since the two militaries could clash at the border, they had worked out a series of CBMs to reduce the risk of serious escalation. Galwan was the exception that proved that proved the rule fatalities were low. Beyond these state-to-state measures, Delhi and Beijing encouraged P2P tourism, cultural and academic links, and trade to anchor ties at a societal level as well. As a result, thousands of Indian students are in China getting relatively low priced and high quality education and are also getting to know their host country beyond inflammatory headlines. At least three factors are driving India and China back to this normal diplomacy. In a piece I wrote for the Asia Peace Program at the National University of Singapore before Donald Trump won the US presidential election, I suggested that the three drivers of detente are economic, military, and political. These will likely be even stronger drivers of India China diplomacy now that Trump is at helm in Washington. Economically, India and China need each other. India's economy is stubbornly stuck on a 30-year growth path of 7% per annum. China's economy is languishing at 5% per annum and could further slow down to grow. Indian businesses desperately need Chinese products, including in many key areas like pharmaceuticals, electronics, and also infrastructure. As for Chinese businesses, they need to diversify in a world where Western protectionism against them is growing. Looking ahead, India is potentially a huge market for China. Militarily, two countries are in a stalemate. It is clear that after Galwan, both sides are prepared to maintain huge military deployments in physically horrible environments to defend every inch of territory, but these take a huge toll on men, material, and money. More importantly, given the terrain and climate, neither side can likely ever win an outright victory on the border. Plus, both confront other military challenges. India must always reckon with the possibility of conflict with Pakistan or cross border terrorism, and worse still, a two front war with China and Pakistan. For China, the main military concerns are in East Asia, war with Taiwan, with Japan over Senkaku, Diaoyu Islands, and Philippines over the South China Sea. In each case, the US could be involved against China. Trump's presidency could heighten President Xi Jinping's concern over US presence and role in the region. Politically, both Delhi and Beijing must constantly worry about Washington, despite all bonhomie between India and US differences. Over immigration, trade relations with Pakistan and Bangladesh, US commentary on India's democratic record, American accusations over a putative Indian assassination plot, and Indian accusation of unchecked Sikh militant activity on the US soil. Some of these worries may reduce with Trump in the White House. Others, such as immigration and trade, could get worse. For China, the US weaponization of trade and technology are likely to continue under Trump. China must also worry about America's naming and shaming of Beijing policies in Tibet and Xinjiang. In short, India and China face a common challenge: how to enhance their bargaining power with the US. One way to signal to Washington that they have other strategic choices and partnerships if pushed too hard. Will this detente last? India and China have squared off in a series of confrontations since 2010. In 2013, Depsang; in 2014, Chumar; in 2015, Birdsey; in 2017, Duklam; in 2020, Galwan; and 2020, Yangtze, with casualty in 2020 and 22. It would be foolish to say that the present detente and normalization is assumed and that the two sides will avoid future clashes. Territorial quarrels are hard to manage and even harder to resolve because land and water is connected to sovereignty, national identity, and memories of colonialism and imperialism. In both India and China make both societies very touchy about any challenges to sovereignty. As Manjari Chatterjee Miller of the University of Toronto suggests, years ago both sides have an enduring sense of victimhood. Resolution of quarrel is possible, but it will take a huge bargain. A bargain is not beyond Modi and Z, but neither leadership looks in a hurry. The drivers of current thaw in relations are structural, economic need, military realities, and political worries over the US are long-term factors that won't easily go away. India-China relations should therefore continue to soften and normalize even in a long-term border strategic agreement appears difficult to achieve. Partners in innovation UK and India can collaborate not just on technology but for Viksit Bharat 2047. In the UK, when I take a long haul flight, drive in a car has a connected technology, or use an online banking app, it's likely that in some way I'm tapping into technology that has been developed in the Global Capability Center in India. However, few UK consumers appreciate how technology collaboration between foreign firms, including those in UK and India's dynamic scientific talent and innovation ecosystem, impact their lives or save lives, as we saw with vaccine development during the pandemic. Technology is a thread that runs through every sector in the UK India economic partnership. I want to make the case that UK and India are partners not just in technology but for Viksit Bharat 2047. In 2024, the UK was the third behind the USA and China in attracting venture capital investment into the technology companies. London alone has more technology startups than the rest of the Europe combined. At the same time, India has become a technology superpower. So much can be achieved when businesses and universities in two countries collaborate. That is why organization I lead, UK India Business Council, welcomed the recent signing of the UK India Technology Security Initiative, a bilateral agreement to increase collaboration on emerging and critical technologies. There are already many examples of such collaboration. UK IBC recently published a report capturing examples and ways to enable more. In financial services, British banks are among the leading investors and already deploying tech-led solutions across segments. By sharing regulatory best practices and standards, India can attract more UK fintech companies, thereby enhancing SME lending and financial inclusion. As a leader in green innovation and regulation, the UK can become India's energy transition partner, providing green technology solutions access to finance through the City of London. The climate change doesn't respect borders, and UK and Indian universities can be a force for global good. Take the Sunrise Project, a collaboration by the Swansea University with 18 academic partners across 5 countries, including Imperial College London, Oxford, Cambridge, IISER Pune, IISc, and several IITs. We argue that India can boost market access for British businesses through sustained government platforms that spark partnerships with Indian industry. India can also expand priority sector lending to include EVs and EV supporting infrastructure alongside renewable energy to reach its goals. Advanced manufacturing and defense is another area where UK and Indian firms are co-developing technology, financial services, green innovation, advanced manufacturing and defense, co-developing technology. Few markets have India scale or need of new capability, but at the same time UK firms can benefit from India's cost-effective manufacturing. We can do more to plug Indian companies into UK supply chains. Our message to UK business is clear: consider India a strategic partner, not just a market. The UK IBC Aerospace and Defence Group, representing 22 UK firms with $60 billion in global revenue, is eager to expand partnership with India. It believes technology infrastructure and investment in India can speed up certain refinements to India's defense acquisition procedure. For example, adopting a more gradual approach to indigenous content to encourage foreign firms into the market, and re-looking at FDI thresholds so that more foreign firms can participate in strategic defense programs. We also argue that UK can do more to help its startup dock into India's defense technology startup scene. For example, an accelerator program for high growth UK firms to enter India. Clearly, the economic relationship is strong and growing. We can be more imaginative in our ambition. At our recent Technology Future Conference, Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal spoke about how UK and India could collaborate on AI and virtual reality to transform education and training, and how a telemedicine partnership could bring down the cost of healthcare in the UK and make quality healthcare available to remotest parts of India. He also suggested that the two countries work to develop climate modeling tools to predict and manage natural disasters. These are excellent ideas that need capital. Recently, I have been imagining a big, bold G2G backed investment fund to support collaboration between UK and Indian startups in emerging technologies. Ideas also need skilled people to make them happen. I have been imagining a time where when we talk about tens and thousands of British students in India taking advantage of economic courses in AI upskilling and understanding the business culture of the next superpower. I started with GCCs and I'll finish with them. 2024 was a good year for the UK India relationship. 25 will be better as UK business leaders realize that engineering and research centers in India aren't just big brands. With new operating models, even mid-size and smaller firms can tap into Indian GCC phenomena. Let let's be imaginative and relentless in pursuing the extraordinary potential of that relationship. Donald Trump is violating a 2022 law that passed with strong bipartisan support to support the inspectors general's independence. India is not a dumping ground. It has maintained a surplus in finished goods trade with many partners, busting free trade myths. Although the Union budget is not the best place to look for trade related announcements, it has become one of the several platforms that communicates India's policy engagement with the global economy. In the upcoming budget, we expect to hear announcements relating to reducing the trade deficit stemming from rupees depreciation and promoting exports all in same breath. Why are periodic policy announcements in the budget even required when continuity and certainty would do the trick for our external objectives? Are frequent changes in the customs duty structure the right instrument to support the laudable Make in India initiative? Can these objectives be realized without integrating into global value chains? It is widely felt that India's relatively high tariff rates are inimical to more integration into GVCs. It is also true that custom duties are no longer an important source of overall tax revenue, but rather an instrument to accomplish other policy objectives, one which is protectionism. US President Donald Trump levied tariffs on Chinese imports in 2018, citing its unfair practice of states' support for enterprises. China retaliated, which led to an escalation of tensions. Trade war hurt everybody. Although Trump says tariffs is his favorite word in the dictionary, and he would use tariffs to boost domestic manufacturing, he has held off the 60% increase he had promised on the campaign trail. Instead, 10% is all that is supposed to be levied on specific Chinese goods beginning February 1. Perhaps the message in Trump dialing down is that tariffs are not the best way to boost local manufacturing in an international world. India will do well to internalize that lesson. Combined with high tariffs, frequent changes do not help. Example is the fluctuating tariff on components used on mobile phone manufacturing. Lenses for camera module in phones, initially duty-free in 2019, were subject to 2.5% duty in 2021, only to become duty-free again in 2023. Similarly, PCBAs and modulated plastics for phone chargers placed a duty hike of 10% in 2018, which was further increased to 15% in 21. While parts of chargers became duty free in 2018, these were subsequently taxed at 10% in 21. The last budget saw the reduction in basic customs duty on mobile phones, their chargers, and PCBAs to 15% from the 20% imposed in 2018-20 period. Unquestionably, policy instability takes its toll on exports and FDI. India's export growth remains stagnant. Its share in global exports lingers around 2%. Lowering custom duties and stabilizing policy are, however, unlikely to be sufficient either in upcoming budget or subsequently. Trade policy requires comprehensive reform, including the establishment of a dedicated committee to ensure policy consistency and to formulate an action plan to achieve the objective of $2 trillion in export by 2030. In this regard, the recent declaration by the CEO of Niti Aayog that India is one of the big economies which is not a part of the large trade agreements need serious evaluation. Mega trade blocs such as Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership and Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership are reshaping global trade, but India is ambivalent about their utility. We feel that India's stance on RCEP and CPTPP is not based on informed discourse. Damage to local manufacturing, persistent trade deficit, and a nationalistic zeal manifested in Make in India govern that discourse. These assertions, for most part, are not backed by data but given popular appeal. They have resulted in long-standing reluctance to pursue second and third generation trade reforms, or for that matter, to even stimulate in an informed debate. The reason India suffers trade deficits with agreement partners is as much instructive of the political discourse is as much is as it is misleading about the economic impact of trade agreements. Both RCEP and CPTPP exclude the US. China goes a step further by keeping China out, potentially leading to easier negotiations. A close examination of recent trade reveals interesting insights. First, India's deficit is dominated by intermediate goods imports. The share of intermediate goods in total imports have been around 70 to 80% under FTAs with Asian countries except Singapore. It was about 90% in UAE and Australia. This is good because it improves the competitiveness of domestic manufacturing and exports. India's intermediate goods exports have also reasons suggesting the possibility of increased forward linkages. Second, contrary to the narrative that India is being used as a dumping ground, it has maintained a surplus in finished goods trade with many FTA partners, including Asian countries. Both RCEP and CPTPP exclude the US CPTT, CPTPP Trans-Pacific Partnership goes a step further by keeping China out. Close examination of recent trade data reveals interesting insights. First, India's deficit is dominated by intermediate goods imports. The share of intermediate goods in total imports have been around 70-80% under the FTAs and Asian countries. It is about 90% with UAE and Australia. This is good because it improves the competitiveness of domestic manufacturing and exports. India's intermediate goods export have also risen, suggesting that possibility of increased forward linkages. Secondly, contrary to narrative being India used as a dumping ground, India has maintained a surplus in finished goods trade with FTA partners, including Asian countries. Additionally, evidence shows that India's export of finished goods have grown after signing trade agreements, migrating to some extent of the political anxiety of a trade deficit. For example, the total exports to ASEAN members increased from $5 billion in 2003 to over $40 billion in 22-23, while export of finished goods increased from $2 billion to more than $20 billion in the same period. We conducted a simulation exercise comparing the impacts of joining RCEP and CPTPP on India. The model predicts that CPTPP will have a more balanced trade effect. The exclusion of two domineering global powers offers a better negotiating environment. In contrast, RCEP, dominated by China, poses potential risk. While RCEP could facilitate trade in intermediate goods, it is likely to aggravate India's trade deficit. The model, we conducted a simulation exercise comparing the impacts of joining RCEP and comprehensive and progressive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. The model predicts that CP Trans-Pacific Partnership would have a more and balanced trade effect. The model predicts that RCEP would lead to a substantial rise in India's imports, with China being the primary beneficiary, while imports would also increase in the case of CPTPP, primarily from Asia. There is also potential for export growth to countries like Mexico, Canada, and Australia. Additionally, CPTPP's focus on quality standards and intellectual property aligns with India's long-term economic aspirations. CPTPP appears to be a more practical and strategic pathway, both economically and politically. With China excluded, the political economy will be easier to navigate. However, the word of caution by itself, trade openness will not deliver unless accompanied by domestic reform to remove structural deficiencies. All things considered, a re-evaluation of the pessimism surrounding trade agreements is called for. Diminishing the university. UGC's draft regulations are a piece with efforts to destroy autonomy and excellence in higher education. The provisions of the draft UGC Regulations 2025 pertaining to the appointment of Vice Chancellor have been rightly criticized for diluting the autonomy of universities, power of states, and the principle of federalism, in floating the draft powers that have seemed to have lost the sight of the important goals that need to be kept in mind while regulating higher educational institutions. Certain reforms are needed to address systemic challenges. However, as a teacher at a central university, I wish to highlight that sweeping set of changes proposed by the draft regulations in the conditions for appointments and promotions of faculty by laying down clear, transparent, and stable criteria. Regulations are meant to protect universities from political insurance in interference, ensure administrative accountability, and uphold institutional autonomy. If they are adopted in their present form, the 25 regulations will deliver a body blow to the higher education in India. The University Grants Commission mandate does not extend to setting agendas for curricula. However, Clause 3.8 of the draft regulation indicates a realignment of academic focus towards specific ideological and market driven objectives. They emphasize contributions in areas such as teaching, learning, research in Indian knowledge ecosystems, and startups. Clause 4.1, Subclass 3 disqualifies assistant professors with over 10% of 10 years of experience from directly applying for professorship unless they serve as associate professors for at least 3 years. This provision punishes assistant professor who currently qualify for professorship on the merit of their teaching and research contributions. It introduces additional barrier for qualified candidates and effectively penalizes the scholars for their contributions. Only 10% of professors at level 14 can be promoted to level 15. This provision includes an artificial quota and arbitrariness. It could create an unnecessary hierarchy among professors and is bound to undermine collegiality and the morale of faculty. The existing regulations require career advancement scheme applications to be processed within 6 months, with promotions backdated to the minimum eligibility date upon successful assessment. This ensures fairness and protects faculty from institutional delays. Clause 5.6, however, removes the backdating provision, allowing universities to delay promotions without accountability. This change unfairly penalizes faculty. Administrative efficiencies can lead to career setbacks in terms of seniority, pay, and professional recognition. 2018 regulations excluded books and chapters as eligibility for promotions but required an equal number of journal publications from college and university teachers. The 25 draft regulations reinstate the earlier criteria and exempt college teachers from publishing the promotions to level 14. The UGC has pushed through 2018 policy despite criticism. These rollbacks, along with recent disbanding of care list of academic journals, reflect an inconsistent and cavalier approach to scholarly publishing standards. These erratic and frequent changes in criteria disrupt academic career plans and discourage long-term investments in teaching and research. Without surety of fair treatment, faculty will remain vulnerable to the whims of administrators, and the regulatory hurdles seem akin to punishment and the form of censorship. The National Education Policy 2020 proposed a significant upheaval in higher education institution regulation, including disbanding the UGC and replacing it with the Higher Education Commission of India. Regulations on recruitment, promotions, and service conditions of faculty in higher education institutions have historically been linked to pay structure revisions following the recommendations of Central Pay Commission. Clause 1.3 states they shall come into force from the date of notification. However, the date of implementation of the revision of pay shall be January 1, 2016. The date of implementation mentioned here is that 7th Pay Commission, revealing a sad case of copy paste. Why this urgency? While there has been a long-standing demand to fill faculty vacancies in higher education institutions, recruitment in different universities are evoking a deep sense of disquiet among those who care for education as a driver for democracy and excellence in India. Similarly, frequent use of NFS not found suitable, particularly in the case of SC, ST, and OBC candidates, is causing severe damage to the idea of representation and affirmative action. I am pained to note that premier higher education institutions are being actively reduced to a pale shadow of their earlier selves. Campus culture are being steeped in aggression and impunity. It is an open secret that current regime is making ideological appointments in higher education institutions, and complaints of shortage of eligible candidates are misleading. The shortage of candidates who are ideologically aligned with the regime and its affiliate groups. This is evident from the fact that small coteries of barely eligible persons are occupying multiple administrative positions in several higher education institutions, and in some cases, individuals are holding charge of multiple institutions. The goalposts shift every year. Every time the regime is done scrapping at the bottom of the barrel of candidates that it deems suitable. Support our defense needs. Modernization programs for services will require budgets backing. Military's financial planners are awaiting the union budget with bated breath. Since September, the various armed services directorates and departments have been finalizing their financial wish list for the year ahead. Soon they will know how much of that will be made available. All that is presently clear that military is not among the government's top priority. In the current year's budget, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman allocated less than 13% of government expenditure to defense, continuing a multi-year trend of falling allocations. Over the last 5 years' budgets, defense spending as a percentage of central government spending has fallen steadily from 13.81%, 13.2%, 13.65%. Last year it was 13.25%, and this year it is testing that 13% mark. At present, of GDP, defense allocations have similarly fallen from 2.4% in 2021, 2.12%, 2.1% last year. It dropped to below 2% to 1.97%. In the current year, it dropped to 1.9%. Defense spending as a percentage of GDP is an important marker. Spending up to 3% of GDP on defense is considered acceptable by leading agencies such as IMF, World Bank, North Atlantic Treaty Organization Charter enjoins member countries to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense so as to contribute effectively to NATO's collective defense. China, like India, spends less than 2% of its GDP on defense, while the US spends more than 4%. The services capital spend has risen over the past 4 years by about 40,000 crore from 1 lakh 31,000 crore in 2021 to 1 lakh 72,000 crore in 24-25. That averages out to a rise of about 7% every year, as inadequate for the funding a military modernization program as ambitious as India's Atmanirbhar program. The distribution of the capex budget between the three services is disproportionate to the workload that each services handle. Of the 1.5 million strong military, the army fields 1.26 million personnel, or 84% of the total, with many of them embroiled in active combat in Kashmir and northeastern states. Yet the army's share of capital budget has been limited to 20 to 28% of the total capex allocation. This leaves army with limited kitty from which pay for badly needed weaponry such as artillery, guns, attack helicopters, personal protective clothing for soldiers, etc. Meanwhile, equipment-intensive Navy with 5.5% of India's military personnel was allocated between 31 to 36% of the capital budget during 22 to 25. It remains short of warships, especially capital warships and submarines that are essential for protecting our 7,500-kilometer coastline, over 2 million square kilometers of exclusive economic zone, and the Indian Ocean sea lines of communication through which more than half the world's seaborne trade passes, and global commons such as freedom of navigation. Paradoxically, most worrisome equipment shortages exist in the Indian Air Force, even though that the service gets largest share of capex with just 10.5% of the military donning the IAF's blue uniform. The Air Force has been spending between 34 to 48% of modernization budget. That is partly because military aircraft are prohibitively expensive. 36 Rafale fighters cost $8.7 billion, and Defense Ministry's commitment to Make in India policy makes aircraft even costlier. Each MK each Sukhoi MKI fighter built in HCL Nashik plant cost about 100 crore more than the same fighter which when built in Russia. At a broader level, the Defense Ministry receives a higher allocation than any other ministry. The broad pattern of allocations remains similar from year on year to year. In the current defense budget, almost 15% was earmarked for sustenance and operational preparedness. About 50% went on personal cost, including 30% for salaries and allowances. 22.7% on defense pensions and 41% on civil organizations under Ministry of Defense. Finally, 27.7% was allocated to capital expenditure head for modernizing the country's arsenal. Most modern militaries spend between 50-60% of the total defense outlay on the capital account so that modern weaponry and equipment ensure a combat edge over the adversary. This is a long-standing weakness in India's military, where there is severe shortfall of funding for higher technology research and development. During her budget speech last year, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced that government would spend 11 lakh crore under the capital head. Given the claimants on the amount, the military can get only a limited share of the pie. Finally, defense budget watchers remain bewildered by the absence of accounting logic that governs the grouping of several items. It remains unclear why the allocations to the Border Road Development Board, Coast Guard organizations, and Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry have been placed in the Ministry of Defense Civil Accounting Head. The Border Roads Organization Board and Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry clearly belong in the Army's accounting head, while the Coast Guard belongs under the Navy's head. Similarly, capital budget was earlier crystal clear, with allocations to each of the three services grouped separately in their own subheads. Now they have all been grouped together, and it is impossible to differentiate the Army's allocations from those of Navy and Air Force. Perhaps that was the intention. Unfreezing ties. This refers to editorial Breaking the Ice, January 29. In a welcome development, India and China, in their ongoing efforts to iron out differences, have announced the resumption of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra from this summer. Significantly, the relations between India and China has soured after a military clash along the lines of actual control in 2020. Following the 4 year standoff, the two sides reached an understanding in October 24 to reduce tensions and rebuild faith. Relations have improved over the past 4 months in several high level meetings, including one between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping in Russia last in October. The hope is that effort holds and yields positive results for bilateral ties and for both countries. India's young minds. This refers to the editorial classroom success. It is gratifying to learn that the ASER survey report that foundational learning skills have improved remarkably in school children post-COVID. Conventional teaching was put on hold for a long time due to the pandemic and replaced by ramshackle online teaching system which deprived many students from rural and marginalized communities. In view of rapid strides being made in the field of science and technology, a regular revision of our syllabi and courses to equip our students should be ensured. Our successes, highlighted by the ASER report, should not lead to complacency, and our education sector must keep up with the development across the globe. This refers to the editorial classroom success. It is astonishing to witness India's development in education sector despite having one of the longest school closures in the world during the pandemic. This is a result of continuous policies and strategies implemented by the government, including the National Education Policy, which has given new life to India's education system. If the foundational education of 100 million children remains strong, India will soon become one of the most developed countries in the world. After all, the future of India lies in the little hands of young minds brimming with innovation and creativity. So that's all. See you in the next one.